Today, I'm going to be talking about how I've developed through my career, my portfolio career, and how you can do the same too. And essentially, it's an opportunity for us to answer some of these questions. Are you feeling trapped in your traditional career? That is the fundamental question. Does it feel like a life sentence now? And, hearing me and other people talk about the opportunity to be multifaceted and develop this flourishing portfolio career, is that even possible? That is the question. How can you align with your skills and passions? But before we get into any of that, if you like this video, make sure to like it. And if you want to see more videos centered around contracting and portfolio careers, leadership, etc., then make sure to subscribe to this channel to receive more content like this. And if you don't know who I am already, my name is Michael Tabirade. I'm a consultant for my company, Mastery Group, and my aim is to help people like you navigate change in the world in order for you to be more flourishing when it comes to building your portfolio career. Now, I've got some statistics here, but before I get into the statistics, now, if you feel like you've done everything right when it comes to your career, the traditional path is becoming a relic. It's becoming something that is spoken about, but not really understood or received. And actually, people are in this weird space of, do I stick to doing this traditional career path or do I do something that's different? Now, of course, it's going to work for many, don't get me wrong. But there are some people who are multi-potentialized, multifaceted by nature, who are more attracted to a different model, which is more aligned to where the world is going. I remember in my career in the NHS where I was just focusing purely on my job. There were times where I was stretched, which is a good thing. I was burnt out, which isn't so much of a good thing. And actually, not all the time, but there were some instances where I was in toxic cultures, and I knew that actually I couldn't be beholden to this space completely. Now, if this is something that you're looking to explore deeply, especially when it comes to contracting, then make sure to check out my contracting readiness assessment. And it's an opportunity for you to learn more about whether you're in the right space to start contracting. So what is keeping so many people stuck? Why do many people feel like they can't escape this traditional career ladder? Now, according to the British Medical Association, that is the BMA, at least 30%, just over 30% of medical professionals felt burnout of some sorts. And actually, when the King's Fund did some analysis on the NHS survey, they found similar figures as well. And so this is a great example of at least people within the public sector who have to provide so much supply to the demand that exists within the UK. And when I think about this goes to the next point. I know I felt that burning pressure. I've been burnt out within the NHS at least 5 times on different occasions. I remember the last time when I was surrounded in a toxic culture. And this is not necessarily trying to put the NHS down, because the NHS is a great resource that the UK has, but of course there are many challenges and problems that exist with it. But I know there was this deep desire for me to escape. I've spoken about it on this channel before. And this is why I started contracting, to get that sense of flexibility and autonomy. Now, I'm not going to say it's the silver bullet, but it definitely gives me something that I didn't have before. And obviously, based on my experiences and everything that's happened in my career, I wanted to get a deeper sense of value and worth. There were some middle management roles that I did. There were some senior management roles that I did, but it wasn't enough for me to really express my value. I felt underutilized in many ways. And I wanted to do more, have more, and be more when it came to my portfolio career. Now, I want to make this clear. I know I spoke about the traditional job being the relic of the working world, but essentially there is a trend that's happening. So the OECD has stated that actually roughly 50% of people within the UK are going to have some sort of portfolio career by 2030. Now, they didn't say it specifically like that, but this is really being seen based on how they're redefining work. And that's naturally what has to happen. We're redefining work and what it means to work. This is where we're looking at how we're using technology, what remote work looks like, the fluidity of things, the culture of things. Everything is being redefined. And some of you watching this will know that I like to always talk about the lack of inaction. Like, what does this actually mean? What could this mean if you stay in a position where you're not moving forward? And here are some of the things that could affect you. So number 1, persistent burnout and emotional toil. So when you're in this situation where you're like, wish I was doing this, and you try all these different things. You try all these different things in order to make sure that you try to satisfy the thing that is missing in your life, but it doesn't necessarily go that way. It's that shiny eye syndrome. You start doing all of that stuff. And so if you're doing that in addition to working hard in the environment that you don't want to be at, you're going to get some burnout. You're going to get emotional burnout, so to speak. I've had that before. I've had values-based burnout, and it sounds like a weird thing, but essentially what's being said here is that because the things that I deem important to me within the working space was not present, was burnt out. I was lethargic. I didn't understand it, but it was something that was very real. And of course, if you start burning out, you're going to be in a position where you're more stagnant and you're not necessarily developing the right skills or experiences, which means you're left behind. There's also this loss of autonomy potentially because you feel like you're losing control. It's that simple. You feel like you're just a cog in a machine. And with that in mind, who wants to be in that space? When I think about what drives people, I think about Daniel H. Pink's book, Drive. And I always reference this, but he talks about the 3 factors of purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Autonomy is essentially having that sense of freedom and ability to think for oneself and do for oneself. Mastery is essentially having the highest level of competency for a given skill or skill stack. And then purpose is deep rooted in meaning and the pursuit of your goals. And if it's aligned to your context and your meaning, then it's a goal worthwhile, so to speak. And so if you're not necessarily aligning to any of those 3 factors, then you're going to have some sort of unrealized potential. And this is what ends up happening. You're put in a situation where, because of the fact that you stuck to a traditional career path that someone has told you about, or because you haven't necessarily done the research on, or because you don't feel au fait, you're stuck. You're just in the same space. But as I always say, with every reaction, there's an opposite reaction. And so we have to start thinking about, if these are some of the negatives, what are the things that we're trying to do? How do we do those things? What opportunities present itself? Of course, when we think about the portfolio career, i.e., a career path that you build, a career path that you create, you have to understand this is not about stringing together like part-time jobs and doing all this kind of stuff there. This is not about overwhelming yourself with loads of things, etc., etc. No, this is about making sure that you are doing things that are aligned to you because you are building this lifestyle. And so with that in mind, the way I think about it is I think about it in terms of the core bucket, the growth bucket, and the learning or scaling bucket. And I'll talk more about those things in a second. Now, of course, as I've highlighted before, a portfolio career is a career that you build. It's one that you create. So it's about mindset. It's about the established set of attitudes. It's about how you think about things. And so your context would define your sense of purpose, your decision-making, your destination and your destiny, so to speak. And so when we think this way, truly, when we believe in oneself and believe in our opportunity, then actually a portfolio career path is more possible. Some people will hear this and be like, you're just spouting hope and X, Y, and Z. Yeah, I am spouting hope because some of you are actually going to believe what I'm saying and it's going to be possible for you. Some of you watching this are actually doing it, but you don't realize you're doing it. And some of you are actually doing it and you realize you're doing it. And so you're going to do more of it. No one's going to be the same. Homogenization doesn't exist. And so when we think about a portfolio career, we think of some of the following things. So variety and stimulation. What I mean here is that you have the opportunity to do different things based on choice and prioritization, let's be clear. And it's more stimulating because it's a goal that is worthwhile or goals that are more worthwhile. And so this is really important because naturally as human beings, we like shiny eye syndrome. We like new things, but we have to have that right balance and synchronicity and harmony, as my friend would say, when it comes to deciding what we do when it comes to our portfolio career. Because if you try to do everything, you'll definitely burn out. But if you do some specific things strategically, that's what makes sense. Now, before I even get onto the other 4 things, when I talk about the consultant mindset, which is something that I believe that modern day portfolio careerists needs, modern day independent professionals need. And that is somebody who has a strategic view or approach when it comes to solving a specific or unique problem for their end client, utilizing frameworks, processes, intuition, emotional intelligence, etc., to help solve the problem for their client. So they're using all these different things. And so I say this to say that above it all, you're a problem solver. Above it all, you're strategic by nature. Above it all, you have frameworks to help you so that when you do build your portfolio career, it makes sense. It's not scattergun. Second thing is around autonomy and flexibility. And McKinsey talks about this in a study in 2016 in relation to free agents, essentially saying that if you are aligned to your values and things that are really important to you, you're more likely going to get life satisfaction. That's just a common sense thing. And so this is why having an inventory of what you've done and actually understanding your core values and your means values, so the things that are important to you and the things that drive you and help you make decisions in order to move towards your ends values, the things that you're aiming for. It's important to know that stuff so that you can decide things that make sense for your life. People don't just talk about values for value's sake. I mean, maybe they do, but that's why you do that, because it's a great tool, a great way to help you make decisions. The other thing is diversified income. So this is where you have resiliency when it comes to your financials. And this is why it's called a portfolio. If you think of a portfolio as a basket or a pie chart, it helps you understand that actually there will be a huge proportion that is in your core bucket that generates you the income. But there are things that you are growing, which are smaller parts of the portfolio basket that makes another part of your income, and things that you're learning that are not part of your income yet, but will become as they move into the growth bucket, and the growth bucket moves into the core bucket. And so you don't have to rely on one employer. You don't have to rely on one system. There are different ways in which you can do it. When I think about myself, the main thing that pays me is obviously the consulting work. And on the side of that, and this is part of like my buckets, which I'll talk about, I've got my investing income as well. Now, I haven't done it in a way where it distributes the income to me. I've done it as an accumulating thing. However, these are in my core bucket. Of course, in the growth bucket, this is things like YouTube, the coaching, the content, all of that kind of stuff. And then in my learning bucket, this is all the tech, the AI, the automations, things that I'm doing for my body. These are things that I'm learning for myself to benefit me, but I'm not putting pressure on myself to put it in the growth bucket or make it the core thing. Because why would I do that? And this is how you do it in a way that isn't heavy. Now, the Open University talks about the fact that the portfolio career is the true path towards creating a more sustainable and fulfilling career. I mean, you don't need the Open University to say that, to know that, but it's the truth. But this comes down to design. This really comes down to how you design this career path for you. Because if it's just scattergun and it's willy-nilly, then that statement and research doesn't make sense. And finally, consultancy.uk highlighted that there was a growing trend in late 2024 of independent workers, independent contractors reporting that they had more satisfaction when it came to their career. There was a growing trend. And so with this growing trend, this kind of satisfies what was highlighted in relation to the OECD element of more people becoming portfolio careerists by 2030. So of course, based on my own journey, the question becomes, how do you actually build a portfolio career? What does that framework look like? And with everything that I do, I'm always going to stick to the high-level version of it when it comes to understand, reach, expand. For anybody who's watched my videos to the end, you'll realize I say that all the time, but it's a neat model that fits into most topics that I talk about. So first of all, we need to understand. Now, before I even get into it deeply, I do have a bigger framework, but I'll stick to the simpler one. And if you want to find more information, feel free to let me know, but I'll weave it in somehow. So understanding, really this starts with context. I had the same conversation with the host of a podcast that I was on, and actually I described to them that context is so key. In essence, if I understand my background, if I understand my mother and father's history, if I understand my culture, if I understand my country or countries, if I understand my experiences and how they've shaped me, my values and what I'm looking for in life, then I have a good sense of what my Northern Star is. It makes sense. And so with that in mind, over the years, when I get into roles and start to build expertise and experience, I can understand what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, what are my opportunities, or what are my threats. And so I start to take inventory of what I need to be leaning on more and what I shouldn't be. This is how I've done it. So I know I have a strength when it comes to program management or coordination or facilitation. I know I have a strength when it comes to coaching people and emotional and social intelligence. I know I may have a weakness when it comes to not trying to be a perfectionist, as an example. So being too much in the detail at times. So with this in mind, it helps me understand what my strengths and weaknesses, and based on my strategy, i.e. the approach that I take in order to create a unique value for myself, what I need to be doing. So I'd say to you, start off with some sort of SWOT analysis, and then you can possibly do a PESTLE analysis. So that is, again, the political elements, the economic, the social, the technology, the legal, and the environmental. So this helps you understand the market, because at the end of the day, if you don't understand the market, what are you doing? You could be passionate but punching against the wall. So a SWOT analysis and a PESTLE analysis are great ways to get started. But also what you want to do is carve out your CV, understand it, have a clear CV. So what is the profile summary? What are your key skills, okay, or top skills? What are your expertise? What are the specific experiences that you've had for each workspace or end client or whatever it may be? And actually shape it using the model that I've highlighted, PAR, problem, action, result. What strategic problems did you solve, either operationally or programmatically? What actions did you actually take? And what were the results? What are the benefits? Can you measure these benefits as customer surveys, customer satisfaction, a change in a process, a shift of some way, a transformation, money made or saved? What was it? Because when you can get that succinct, then you can be more granular in terms of your approach. So this is all to say, you have to understand yourself first and then take inventory of specifically what your skill set is based on your experiences and your expertise, so that you're clear of your competencies and you can move on to the next step. So the next step is reach. So essentially here, this is about strategic planning and personal branding. And so what I mean here is, based on all of the data that you've gathered, based on your deep reflection and your audit, there's going to be a gap. So you'll look at your SWOT analysis, you'll look at your PESTLE analysis, and you'll be like, okay, cool. What makes sense for me to do right now? You can start to develop a plan, because all plans are born out of a gap analysis. What is that? In the program management world, that is essentially understanding what the current issue is and what the current situation is, what the future state looks like or should look like, and what is the gap in between? What are the actions that you need to take in order to move forward? It's very similar to the wisdom and hindsight approach that coaches use. And so the strategic plan basically should give you an idea of what steps you need to take. Now, of course, that needs to be bound by the vision that you see for yourself. So this is basically where you want to go. Paint a vivid, clear picture that gets you on a journey that is very specific and succinct and actually measurable to a degree. The mission, how are you going to do it? What are the different things you're going to do? Are you just going to focus on working a 9 to 5? Are you going to do contracting? Are you going to do something else? And for what purpose? And then also your approach. Are you going to be learning new things? Maybe this is on YouTube. Maybe this is vocational studies. Maybe this is actually traditional studying. Are you going to be doing an apprenticeship? Are you going to be doing some sort of non-executive directorship or trusteeship? Are you going to be a volunteer? With the idea, in order to get more depth when it comes to your domain expertise that you're trying to develop. So for me, I'm trustee for the Institute of Leadership, and I'm also the chair of the Risk and Finance Committee within that space. And so I'm developing domain expertise in terms of being an executive, but also understanding finance and risk at an organizational level. So it's different, man. It's a different skill set. But this is going to be great for future endeavors when I try to provide more impact for other people. That was a strategic move. And so you have to think to yourself, what makes sense? Sometimes things are going to land in your lap, and other times you're going to have to find it yourself. That all comes down to strategy. How are you going to find these opportunities? And so before I continue, we were talking about understand before. What I forgot to mention is that in this space, you have to have a clear understanding of what is your core revenue streams. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be one thing, maybe 2, I'll explain. So here, the core things would be a contract. So everything's really a contract. You got inside of IR35, you got outside of IR35, you got freelance contracting, you got marketplace contracting, you got procurement contracting or tendering contracting. You've got the opportunity to find, work through referrals, online, etc., etc. There are so many different ways. You got permanent 9 to 5s, that's a contract. Fixed term, that's a contract. It's just a different type of contract. They are all contracts. But the main thing I want to harp on about here is that if this makes money for you solidly, then that needs to take up most of your time. Right now, roughly, outside of IR35 contracting takes up about 75% of my time. Yeah, I calculated it like a geek. And so once you know your core, then you can start thinking about cash. You can start thinking about investing. Now, some people are like, oh, you don't need to invest, and you can invest in your business and all this kind of stuff there, but we're not even talking about business yet. So if you don't want to do that, at least have an emergency fund. At least have something saved for a house or a car, whatever it may be. Maybe you want to put money into a cash ISA, into a LISA for your pension, maybe a self-invested private pension, especially if you're a contractor, so you can save on taxes when it comes to expenses because it's seen as a business expense. Maybe you want to be in a position where you are putting it into some sort of fund or pie on Trading 212 as an example. Maybe an exchange trade fund, so an ETF for a specific industry that makes sense based on all that inventory work you did before. Or maybe you want to put it into an index fund like the S&P 500 or multiple different assets because you don't want a risky portfolio, but because of your age, it may be a bit riskier relative to somebody who's in their 50s. So that's the cash element. So you started off with context. That's the deep reflection and all of that kind of stuff there. You've got the core work. So this is going to be the contract that you're set up with, and then you've got the cash. This is essentially saving for a rainy day or for something specific. This forms your foundations of understand. So coming back to reach, so within this space, it's really about starting to not only strategic plan, but also thinking about how do you develop a strong brand. Of course, a brand is about presence. It's about association. So it's about how people associate you with other things, okay, in order for them to be drawn to you. So this comes down to visibility, and this comes down to how you are visible. So this is going to be either online or offline. Of course, if it's offline, this is going to events, this is going to maybe even parties. This is making sure that you network with people, talking to colleagues, just showing your face and actually having a strong pitch, which basically highlights what you do, who you help, and how you help them. It's as simple as that. And so when it comes down to that, you have a strong way of presenting yourself and you're memorable. So practice your pitch. But in addition to that, you should do, let's say, 20 to 30% like talking and 70 to 80% listening, because when you have strong emotional intelligence, okay, which contributes to this, then you're more likable. You're just more likable by nature. And so this is where you start to attract more people, more opportunities. Maybe you're doing more podcasting, you're doing more speaking. Maybe you are going to events on a panel, as an example. You don't even have to do this external to your organization. You can do this within your organization. But the beauty of all this stuff is that actually the PR elements can be filmed. And this is where you may transition onto online, or you just do online. So again, you want to make sure that you have a platform that represents you, whether this is your website and or something like LinkedIn and or YouTube. You see me doing YouTube videos right now. And so for the YouTube, clear header, clear branding, clear topics. You want to make sure that actually, number one, you understand what you're good at and what your experiences are. That's the understand element. Number two, you want to be clear about who your target audience is. Maybe you want to start helping people B2C. Okay, and we'll come on to that in a second. Number three, you want to be in a position where, okay, you understand what their problems are. You understand exactly how they're saying it. You want to be clear, is there market demand? Is there market demand? How do you check this? You check to see if something within your specific field or industry is selling. You check to see how people are talking about it. Your content will actually show you if things work. When I did my 90-day challenge, there are some things that hit with my topics and some things that didn't. And so that came down to my thumbnail and the title. So the whole bunch of stuff that you need to exercise, because you want to use the information from your market in terms of how they say things and throw it back in terms of marketing when it comes to your thumbnails, your titles, etc. That's how you engineer it. When I did my lead magnets, I started, throwing my lead magnets all over the place based on the topics I was talking about, but there is a clear winner. And the ones in relation to work, so for example, CV template, etc., that's what's dominating. So I know to dive deep on that. So this is how you engineer it. And this is how you become more known, because you're giving people what they want based on what they think you can provide for them. Because it's all association of thought, and that's how you become a thought leader progressively in different ways, shapes, and forms. If we're going to something like LinkedIn, again, you want a clear sort of like header image, clear header text that highlights who you are, who you help, with additional accolades if need be. You want to have your about page, which is an expansion of your pitch essentially, and allow people to come and contact you. You want those featured images where, again, people have the opportunity to maybe see your work, even contact you in order to have a sit-down session with you would be great. You want to make sure that your experience section is all full. Everything that you need to fill out on LinkedIn, as an example, fill out. This is what you need to do. And so when it comes to brand, it's really about making sure that you got a clear message, you are consistent, okay? You are making sure that you have the right type of content. And when you do those things, you're in a better position and more people will reach out to you. I've realized for me personally that video works. And actually, if I do video on a daily basis, 9 times out of 10, it's hitting. I'm not looking for loads of like engagement or whatever it may be. I'm looking for the right people to engage. And so this moves from content to coaching. So coaching, and this is all part of Reach, by the way, coaching is where you have the ability to help people. Whether you're a mentor, advisor, coach, it doesn't really matter. Whether you're B2C or B2B, 9 times out of 10, you'll be B2C. You're helping people who want to do what you're doing. Then you can start offering this stuff. All you need to have is a consultation link and sit down with them, understand their requirements, and actually do some coaching with them. Maybe it's a clarity call. Maybe it's a couple of sessions. Whatever it is, maybe it's an advisory service. People start to want your help. And this is what ends up happening. And so you may even start to develop some sort of community from all of this stuff because you've developed the content, okay, whether this is in person or not in person. You've been able to, again, develop some coaching offer, a very basic one. So we're not doing high tech, we're just basically providing our time and being a good coach. And so maybe people want community from you in some way, shape or form. You've already formed some sort of community. That's why they know, like, and trust you, as they say, in order for them to want to help you and actually form this community that's being formed. This is what personal branding is looking like. Now, this is not the same for everybody. Let's not get it twisted. But for the people watching this, yeah, it's going to look like that for most of you. I'm sure of it. That's all part of reach, or what I call the growth element. So this kind of highlights what I was talking about before. And finally, we have expand. So this is about securing opportunities and navigating the new norm. And so again, once you're becoming more out there, not only in your content and everything else, but also in your job and everything else, there may be opportunities for a promotion or a higher paid job. There may be opportunities to do more speaking engagements, or maybe even write a book, or be in the newspaper, or do a certain talk, maybe even a partnership. There are more opportunities at play. But you have to determine and decide what makes sense for you, because at some point you have to gatekeep. And what I mean by that is say yes to certain things, say no to certain things. So that's one thing you have to bear in mind. But the one thing that I think is even more powerful is the things that you control. So you're going to start codifying stuff, okay? What I mean by that is when it comes to your expertise and everything else, it's about putting it into a framework or a process that can be digested again and again and again. And this is where you may produce some sort of course. This is where you may produce some sort of micro SaaS or SaaS. So SaaS being software as a service, using vibe coding and automation tools like N8N, etc., etc. Maybe there is something else. Maybe you set up some sort of franchise model. Who knows? I'm throwing this stuff out there because that's naturally what ends up happening. And so when you codify this stuff, there's an opportunity to scale because it becomes more digital. And actually, you go from being purely a consultant, so to speak, okay, to someone who's more of a CEO element, which is slightly different. Well, it's not even, it is different. And so there you have more of a bird's eye view. And so you would make a decision. Do I want this to be a lifestyle thing, or do I want this to be a sellable asset, or at least emulate a sellable asset so I know that actually is running without me regardless? And so this element of codification and CEO is all under this scaling or learning bucket. And so you'll see understand, reach, expand, or core, growth, and learning or scaling. It's all kind of the same thing in a way, but it helps you organize your routines and your time in such a way that makes sense and is practical. And so this is pretty much what I'm following. Like for me right now, I'm pretty much in the coach/codify stage, okay? So it's kind of like fluttering between the two, and you're not going to have a perfect division, but it's something that I'm following, and I'm seeing that other people are following as well. When I speak to my coaching clients, I'm seeing that they're wanting to do the same thing. And this is me not even telling them this. I haven't even told the world this framework yet. This is the first time I've spoken about it this way. So I've spoken about this slide before. You know, before I wanted to do medicine, it was like 8 years of my life. I didn't really get the grades that were required. So I ended up working in the NHS in order to liaise the clinical and the managerial. But during that time, I delved into entrepreneurship. Rich Dad Poor Dad was one of the first books and events that I went to around this stuff. It led down this whole pursuit of being an entrepreneur, which got me into huge debt, 30K debt. And actually that kept me down. I started to develop a personal brand and focused on, helping businesses, or startups, should I say, develop their brands. And that failed because I was like, it doesn't really feel like I'm qualified enough to talk about this stuff. And it got all too much. I became a qualified coach. I started to take paying off my debt very seriously. And then I quit my job, became a contractor, got engaged, paid off my debts. I did a whole bunch of stuff very, very quickly. And so now I'm on the other side where actually I'm an independent consultant, mainly work for public sector end clients. And in addition to that, I help other individuals like yourself either become independent consultants themselves, contractors, or develop and design a portfolio career that makes sense for them. Ultimately, that's what I'm about. And so hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight. And of course, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I have on offer in order to help you. So check the description in this YouTube video to learn more about that. I want to leave you with this quote, and essentially stating that the anxieties paved the way for greater professional fulfillment autonomy, and a work-life blend that truly suits me. So it was the fear, so false evidence appearing real, that enabled me to face everything and rise. They both state fear, but they're different perspectives. And so that pushed me down a direction. It started off with my context. It then enabled me to understand what was my core thing, which helped me develop the cash model. Moving on from there, it helped me develop some sort of content which allowed me to do coaching. I'm codifying it as we speak and moving towards CEO-ship, so to speak. And you could argue I'm doing elements of that already with various stuff that I'm doing, but it started off with that fear and I've turned that around. And you can do the same thing as well. I'm not saying I'm the perfect model. I'm not saying this is necessarily the silver bullet. But if you resonate with this and it makes sense to you, and I've said some things in here that actually you can identify with, then I'm telling you it's possible. The economy is crazy. The market is crazy. Things are shifting based on volatility, inflation, interest rates, the bond market, geopolitical wars, technology, AI, energy. There's all these things that are affecting our world so easily. But the only constant you have is you. The only thing we can guarantee is change. So if you're adaptable and you understand this stuff, you look at the markets, then you know how to maneuver. You know, there were some stats recently for July 2025 that highlighted that actually there were 164,000 jobs lost relative to the last 12 months. 164,000. The unemployment rate has gone from 4.2 to 4.7%. If we look at the industries that have gained more employees, i.e. there are jobs, we're looking at the public sector. We're looking at admin and support. We're looking at IT services. We're looking at finance and insurance. We're looking at education, and we're looking at the arts. All other industries, negative. People are losing jobs within those industries. So that highlights opportunity for some people who are a bit confused. And obviously, it's not great for those people in those other industries. This is why I say become a process consultant as opposed to just purely niche. You have to have something that is more specific by nature and more broader by nature, as I've spoken about like 2 years ago or so. You have to understand that the political party that's in power determines actually what industries get more roles, what contracting and entrepreneurial opportunities there are based on policies and taxation, and how the economy thrives and doesn't thrive. So whether you're red, blue, white, yellow, green, understand what's actually happening and what you need in order for you to build a portfolio career that thrives, because it will change again and there'll be a different type of opportunity. Understand that seasonally, there are things that change. During the summer holiday, hardly anything happens. During sort of like the end of the financial year, there's more activity because there's money in the market. Use your common sense when it comes to stuff. Understand human psychology, human behavior, how the markets work in that way. So hopefully this has given you a really, really solid way of building a portfolio career, especially one that's based on my experiences. But of course, you can shape it the way you need to shape it. I'm just giving you my framework. Of course, like I said, if part of your portfolio career ambitions is becoming an independent consultant or contractor, then make sure you check out the readiness assessment below. It's a great way to understand where you're at. So it should be the first link in the YouTube description. Of course, let's connect. I'm available on the Instagrams, the LinkedIns, all of that kind of stuff there. But my main thing is YouTube, followed by LinkedIn. Actually, I'm trying to do TikTok here and there, but we'll see where that goes. If you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, contracting, leadership, and everything around my world, so to speak, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.